Hello everybody and welcome to the second talk this afternoon in the Orkney Aviation Festival, and this talk is coming from Olivia Opperman, and Olivia is the Windracers project manager. Now the Windracer project was mentioned in the last talk, if you picked up that one. If you didn't, then this will all be new to you, but she's going to be discussing the use of large UAVs, that's uncrewed aerial vehicles, to provide routes connecting the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. She'll also be reviewing past testing, as well as giving an overview of the aircraft and the future plans. This really is kind of cutting edge stuff. So I'll hand over now to Olivia, who you will be delivering the talk to you. Olivia.
Thank you so much, Dave. Good afternoon. My name is Olivia Opperman. I am a project manager at Windracers. I have been with Windracers now for 2 years and loved every second of it. Next slide, please. So to introduce anybody who doesn't know about Windracers, Windracers is a privately funded Southampton-based technology company that was started in 2018 when the founders approached the University of Southampton with the idea of creating and designing a uncrewed aerial vehicle, a UAV, specifically designed to help with humanitarian aid in countries such as South Sudan, where roads and the infrastructure don't help with humanitarian aid delivery. It usually ends up being large, expensive Antonov aircraft that come in and do airdrops. So a low-cost aircraft like Ultra would be ideal for the operation. And very quickly, the University of Southampton picked this up and started rolling, and there were designs already in 2018, and the first aircraft was starting to be built as a prototype very, very quickly. Next slide, please. So Ultra, or uncrewed low-cost transport aircraft, is a twin-engine fixed-wing aircraft with carrying capacity of up to 100 kilos and a range of up to 1,000 kilometers. It's got a 10-meter wingspan, which is about the same size as a small Cessna aircraft, and has been designed with robustness built in. It can fly in very broad wind and weather limits, and has been designed to land on unprepared runways such as grass, gravel, tarmac. It's the whole philosophy of designing it was to produce no single point of failure. So all of the control surfaces have been broken down so that if one servo on a control surface breaks mid-flight, the aircraft can continue flying. It has 2 engines so that if one goes down, it can still continue its flight safely. It has a large, easily accessible payload bay with volume of up to 700 litres, which is about the same size as the boot of a hatchback car. And it's got low build and operating costs, which was vital for the design brief to be able to operate in countries like South Sudan. Next slide, please. So here are just a few photos showing some of the operational highlights that we've had in the time that we've been operating, now 4 years that we've been operating. You can see various weather conditions. Wick was a serious weather window that we really struggled with, but managed to fly. And we've flown in many, many different places all over the country, up to the most northerly airfield, Unst, down to very most southerly one, Bredannick, and the Isles of Scilly. So next slide, please. So just to walk you through some of the work that we've done to date. This was our first point-to-point operations that we carried out in April 2020. This was a real milestone for the UAV industry. This sort of operation hadn't been run ever before, and we were delivering for NHS, taking medical supplies over to the Isle of Wight from Leon Solent Airfield. which wasn't that far distance, but it was about 12 kilometers. But during the lockdown, the ferries weren't running as often and the NHS was struggling to get their supplies. So we were called in, and you can see Professor Cherrett from the University of Southampton loading up the aircraft in the top photo there. And the bottom photo shows the electronic conspicuity image of how our flights ran from Lyon Solent to Binstead Airfield in the Isle of Wight. We were carrying an average payload of 40 kilograms, which filled the 700-litre payload bay. And this really taught us how important that payload bay volume was, because the way the NHS package their supplies is in these large polystyrene boxes that weigh next to nothing, but take up a lot of volume. So having the large space for this was absolutely vital. And yes, this was a world first that was picked up by news channels all over the place, which was very, very exciting. Next slide, please. Moving on from this in the Isle of Wight, we moved down to the Isles of Scilly and did our first flights down there in December 2020. These again were with the NHS, and we were flying about 27 nautical miles from Land's End Airport to the Isles of Scilly to St Mary's Airfield. The average load that we were carrying was only 50 kilograms, but again, filled up our payload bay because it was NHS stuff where they use these large boxes that you're basically sending air. And it was fully autonomous from takeoff to landing for the entire flight, which was a first for us, as usually we had to do some manual flying as well. Next slide, please. So after we completed those flights in December 2020, we stayed down in Cornwall for a little bit longer, and we did some more flights, this time from Perranporth Airfield, just a little bit further into Cornwall, down to the Isles of Scilly. And we completed 4 weeks of scheduled flights, 5 days a week. Very, very early in the morning, we were flying for Royal Mail this time, and they needed us to fly early in the morning to deliver their mail from Perranporth over to the Scilly Isles. We completed 211 kilometers flight distance, and we were unloading in the Isles of Scilly in under 2 hours. We had a very limited time window for these return flights. We were taking off at 6 a.m. in the morning, and we had to be landed back in Perranporth by 8 o'clock for Perranporth Airfield to open up for general aviation flying. So we were working with the general aviation to concentrate on how we were flying, working with ATC. It was our first time managing that sort of style of operation, as before we'd been operating in lockdowns. Next slide, please. So this was the opening of the SATE operations, and we, as some people may have listened in on the previous talk done by David Holden and Doogie Cook, SATE is the Sustainable Aviation Test Environment, and is a project with a large consortium members, and has been running now for 18 months and has just been extended into another 2 years. So for this first phase of the project, Windracers ran two separate trials. This first one was our Orkney trials, and we were operating for 4 weeks during September and October of last year. We were flying from Kirkwall down to Wick and then on to North Ronaldsay and Fairarle. We were carrying post for Royal Mail and other things. We brought back some wool from North Ronaldsay to Kirkwall. We were just running scheduled routes for 4 weeks to try and increase our limits of operations, flying in brand new weather to us. Scottish weather is quite harsh in comparison to Cornish weather. And we learned a lot from those trials. There was a huge amount of press involved, and Royal Mail really loved the fact that we were doing these on scheduled flights every single day during the weeks we were flying, unless we were rained out or winded out and the weather limits were outside of our limits. So next slide, please. The next set of operations that we had were what we've called our Shetland trials, and they were carried out earlier this year in March and April. We were operating from Tingwall in the Shetland Islands down to Kirkwall and up north to Unst. We were again carrying Royal Mail Post, and we also worked with Scottish Water to help them get their test samples from Unst back to mainland Shetland. It was a milestone for us. We reached the furthest north airfield, which is Unst, and we also completed the longest point-to-point route ever flown by a civilian UAV, which was the 100 nautical mile route that we did from Tingwall to Kirkwall and back again. The next slide, please. So looking to the future, as SATE has been extended using the Future Flight 3 programme that Innovate UK have been running, SATE 2, as we're calling it, has been a huge boost for Windracers to be able to extend our operations. And the aim in this is to create a network of routes across Scotland. This will involve a huge amount of work. We need to build more airframes to be able to send them up to Scotland and keep them in Scotland. We need to create a long-term strategy for the integration of uncrewed aircraft in unsegregated airspace, and that involves a lot of work with the Civil Aviation Authority. This will be working potentially with Royal Mail again, with NHS Scotland, Scottish Water, Streamline, and there are many other use cases that could possibly get involved in this network of routes that we could be working with, delivering payload for over the 12 months that we plan on operating. This will also include a showcase flight of the first international BVLOS civilian UAS flight. BVLOS is beyond visual line of sight, which we have planned to fly from Kirkwall to Norway. And we also plan to do this on Norwegian Constitution Day or Norwegian Friendship Day during 2024. So that will be a very exciting flight for us. Next slide, please. So the current routes that we have planned, obviously huge asterisks as to these may change. We work with the ATC and we work with general aviation, so these could easily change. But the initial routes we are looking at are on the Orkney Isles. We will be flying from Kirkwall, the hub, to Edy, North Ronaldsay and Papua Estuary. Then we'll be doing some work in the Shetland Islands again, and that will be from Tingwall to Unst, Fairall and Fowler, and we will possibly be connecting Tingwall and Kirkwall again. Then we will also be operating out of Inverness, another High Isle airport, over to the Outer Hebrides, namely Stornoway, Benbecula and Barra are the airfields that we're looking at. We'll also be linking up Inverness and Hamilton, which is where the NHS logistical hub is. So we'll be working to take some of the NHS medical supplies up to Inverness. Then, of course, there is the Norway showcase connecting Kirkwall and Bergen. Next slide, please. Windracers also has a lot of other projects rolling. Our latest Future Flight 3 project is this Swarm project, where we are working with a number of other technology firms and universities to develop a number of different things, but mainly around swarm algorithms for UAVs. We'll be carrying out some surveys in Antarctica with British Antarctic Survey. We'll be carrying out some forest fire detection and mitigation with Lancashire Fire Rescue Service. The University of Sheffield are helping us with some computer vision for our aircraft so that the aircraft can autonomously see if there's anything on the runway that could stop its landing, or help with auto taxiing, and other interesting aspects of computer vision. And then Helix Geospace are helping us with some GNSS anti-jamming solutions so that we can fly in areas where the GNSS has been denied. Next slide, please. There are also, the Royal Mail have picked up us as a huge potential for delivering mail for them, and we are working with them closely on new routes. They have confirmed to work with us on 50 new postal drone routes across the UK for the next 3 years, and are helping us build the aircraft to go along with those. And we will be starting that in the Isles of Scilly, continuing our Cornwall and Isles of Scilly routes. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Olivia. That was great. I have one immediate question that came to mind. You kind of slipped in a term there, which I have no idea what it means.
Okay,
so
sorry.
I'll ask the obvious question, which is, what is swarm algorithms?
So swarm algorithms are, it's a computer code of how aircraft can fly in a swarm, like a swarm of bees, essentially, and not crash into each other, know where each of the aircraft are. And that algorithm is still being developed, and the University of Bristol and Distributed Avionics, our sister company who have developed the autopilot, are working very closely on developing this algorithm so that our aircraft, we can have multiple of them in the air at the same time, detecting whether it's a forest fire or carrying out surveys for British Antarctic Survey, all at the same time, and not crash into each other, essentially.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. It just slipped by, and I thought, I have no idea what that is, so I'll just ask.
No, don't worry, Dan.
That would be the main thing. Now, one of the questions. All right, is the Windracer logo Thor's horse? It's no Thor's horse. It'll be Odin's horse. Is it Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse?
It is the eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, yes. I can't pronounce it very well, but yes.
You pronounced it perfectly. That's exactly how it's pronounced. But yes, so it is. So what's the? Do you have any idea why that was particularly picked?
I actually don't, but I am aware that the founders just thought that was a good way to go. That Odin's horse carried. Yeah. Odin, and that's a good way to go when we're trying to carry humanitarian aid and aid across countries and stuff like that.
Great metaphor. So next question, are there any plans to make a drone that can carry a patient to hospital in an emergency?
There aren't any plans for carrying a patient to hospital at Windracers, at least. We are developing plenty of different ideas of how we may be making a bigger drone that can carry more than 100 kilos. So up to, I think we're planning about 300 kilos would be our next step up. There are also plans to develop an electric version, so that we're not, because it's currently just run on petrol, but obviously that is not going to be continued used in the world. So an electric version would be good. We're also looking into a hydrogen fueled system as well. And as Doogie and David Holden were talking about earlier in the previous talk, we're currently working with some hydrogen fueled aircraft as well. So they will be able to help us with that.
Did you pick Orkney and Shetland just because of the weather conditions, so that you could kind of test your equipment to the maximum, or why were they picked?
It's a bit of a mixed bag as to why we picked Orkney and Shetland. Obviously, the SATE project being based there in Kirkwall was a huge help for us to have the infrastructure for us to immediately go and test there. It is a remote community. It's not. Obviously, we've moved from humanitarian aid. With us having started during COVID lockdowns, traveling abroad was not happening. So Windracers moved the goals through to connecting remote communities. And the Orkney and Shetland Islands are remote communities that struggle with getting their logistical needs as quickly as the rest of mainland the UK gets. We were delivering Amazon Prime parcels that usually North Ronaldsay people get a week after they order them, and we were delivering them next day delivery, which us on mainland UK are very used to, but in the Orkney Islands, that's not the norm. And we would like to help communities be connected with mainland, basically.
You mentioned Norway there. Are there plans, or indeed are there capabilities to go further than Norway?
There are plans for us to go further than Norway. It's just a case of biting off a small amount at the moment and not biting off too much than we can chew. Obviously, we'd love to go over to and do some work over across Canada, because that's another huge mass where you just don't have the connections as easily as normal. And once we've opened up Bergen in Norway, it may be that we're opening up more areas. I don't know where we could go in the future, but it's just one step at a time for us.
Is there the capability for like a human operator to take over the control of the drone, say in bad weather conditions or something like that? Is that sort of written into the plans?
That is written into our safety case. So the CAA, the Civil Aviation Authority, watch our safety case very, very carefully and ensure that we are operating this at the highest standards. One thing that they are absolutely key on is there being a safety pilot, as we call somebody, that's standing on the runway whenever the drone is in visual line of sight and not gone beyond visual line of sight. That safety pilot must be on the runway ready to take manual control if something goes wrong. So we have moved from complete manual control to an augmented manual control, which helps the safety pilot and de-skills that person. So it could be in the future, anybody who has flown a remote controlled aircraft could be able to take control, obviously with a small amount of training, but yes.
So obviously the takeoff and the landing are the kind of critical points. So
takeoff and landing are the critical points if something goes wrong then. So that's why the safety pilot is stood on the runway essentially, or as close to the runway as possible. And they then watch. Obviously, we mainly operate on auto takeoff, auto landings. But if something goes wrong, then the safety pilot can immediately switch to manual control and take over to salvage the situation and ensure that nothing goes terribly wrong.
And is there the capability to like move from one airport to another or something like that if they need be?
Sorry, repeat the question.
So you know, if you're coming into Kirkwall and all of a sudden there's something wrong at Kirkwall Airport, is there the capability to divert to another airport?
So in that situation, we are able to put the aircraft in what's called a loiter, where it just circles outside of any dangerous areas, and we can assess the situation then. It may be that wherever the aircraft has just come from, it flies back there to where there is a safe airfield. The problem being with us having to have somebody on the runway, we can't just divert to a field, for example, where there may be a runway. We have to make sure that there's some of our personnel there ready to take the landing. So in that situation, if, for example, it was on its way back from dropping some mail at North Ronaldsay and something happened at Kirkwall that meant that the aircraft couldn't land, the aircraft would go back to North Ronaldsay and land there.
Right, got you. And presumably the UAVs aren't hampered by weather conditions like poor visibility and things like that like a normal aircraft would be.
Absolutely. So we've flown through thick banks of fog that manned aviation couldn't be able to fly through. Obviously, we have similar wind and weather limits to Cessna aircraft, but the fact that we don't have to have visual references through the flight is a key selling point, really, especially in the Isles of Scilly. Sort of fog rolls in so quickly that suddenly flights get cancelled. I haven't seen fog roll in that quickly in the Orkney Islands, but in the Shetland Islands, we had clouds rolling in within 10 minutes, and we just knew that that was just normal.
Yeah, well, they built an airport in the worst possible place, so that's what went wrong there. So you mentioned that your organisation is privately funded. Who are the shadowy figures in the background? Who's paying for all this?
So the shadowy figures in the background are the two founders. So Stephen Wright and Charles Scales are the two founders who started all of this way back when. And currently it's all privately funded. Obviously, we're working and trying to build up some customer base. Royal Mail Group could be a huge customer, and we've got other possibilities on the table. But yes, those two shadowy people are two men called Charles Scales and Stephen Wright.
That's okay. I was joking, obviously. You really think this is? I mean, this is the way forward as far as this type of maybe short hop or slightly longer hop and cargo and things like that. That we really will be getting a parcel delivered by a UAV.
I don't think that people will be getting a parcel delivered by UAV. This is meant to be middle mile logistics. It's going from one airport to another airport, of delivering a large quantity of the parcels, and then a postman or postwoman then takes it on from the airport and delivers it to you. This is where we are in the market, is that middle mile logistics. We're not planning to deliver or land our drone in your garden. We know that's not going to work. But there may be opportunities in the future. I personally don't think the technology is quite there, or the regulatory airspace is there for a delivery straight to your door of a parcel, for example. But we're helping to close the gap on that middle mile logistics in remote communities.
Okay. Well, my wife's a post person, so I'm sure she'll be happy to hear that. That she's not going to be made redundant with your.
No, we're not trying to put posties out of business. We're just trying to help them. Good.
Olivia, listen, thank you very, very much indeed for that talk. Brilliantly delivered and very, very interesting. It's such an interesting area to look at, and that's been fantastic. So thank you very much, Olivia Opperman, who is the project manager for Windracers. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for listening. We're going to be back again at 6:30. So if you want to rejoin us then, we'll have Andrew Ray, who's a Professor of Engineering at the University in Highlands and Islands, and he'll be speaking about technical considerations and challenges in sustainable aviation. In the meantime, Olivia, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks very much, everyone.